In this lesson, we'll control maximum tilt during a multi-axis contour. After completing this lesson, you'll be able to modify toolpath cutting model and maximum tilt parameters, and use simulate to validate parameter adjustments. In Fusion 360, we're going to carry on with our multi-axis contour. Right now, we've been playing around with multi-axis contour on a planar contour. It's simply along the flat edge on the top of our part. But now we want to explore what happens when this curve starts to move around in all three directions. So we're going to begin by editing this operation, and I want to start by editing the tool. The tool that we've created, this taper mill, doesn't currently have a holder defined. So I want to go into the holder section, and I want to pick a holder so that way we can better understand what is happening when we are colliding with geometry. So I'm going to scroll down until I find a CT40, and I want to move through and I want to see exactly which holder makes the most sense for this tool. In this case, just like we used in previous operations, I'm going to use that CT40-0.125 by 2.36. We'll accept that and select it, and now we have a holder represented when we're going to be simulating. The next thing that I want to do is move to my geometry section, and I'm going to be working around the outside of the part. I want to use this small contour here, and I want to take a look at this to make sure I can understand how I can control the tool and what limitations I might have when we get close to the fixture and also when we get close to stock. Without making any other changes, let's say OK, allow it to generate this operation, and then we can simulate it to see what we're working with. Once it's been created, let's go ahead and simulate and take a look to make sure that we understand exactly where these collisions are happening. So I'm going to slow this down, but I want to play through and see what the tool is doing. So you can see in the underside, we are actually going directly through that stock with a portion of the tool that is non-cutting. We could of course come in and clean out that stock, but we are in a situation where even if we clean the stock out to the end of that fixture, the tool would still be going through it, and that's not something that we want to happen. So we need to look at the control that we have over this tool and what that really means. So let's edit this operation. We're going to go into our passes section, and we're going to modify the maximum tilt value to be 90 degrees. We'll say OK and allow it to regenerate. Once it's been regenerated, let's go ahead and simulate this, and we'll play through it at normal speed. So now you can see that it's trying to adjust its position down here, but as it's going through the stock, it is actually tilting below that 90-degree value that we gave it. I'll slow it down so we can see it a little bit better. You can see that it's tilting down as soon as it gets to those straight sections where it's trying to cut that geometry. So this obviously isn't giving us the result that we would expect. Let's edit this and go back to the passes and take a look at some of our cutting mode settings. This is going to specify what happens along, in this case, a contact curve. Right now, we have it set to trim impossible, which basically means that it's just going to hog through. We have fail when impossible or turn when impossible. So I'm going to set it to turn when impossible just to see what happens. Whenever we're working out what options we need on these multi-axis contours, it's always a good idea to change a single option at a time, then go back and simulate it and play through just to see what happens. I'm going to allow it to play through, and note that we don't have any collisions at the bottom in this case. But what's happening is, as soon as it gets to the situation where it would start to tilt down and intersect with some of this, it just doesn't. It just simply pulls away from the part, and then it moves on up. So this is telling me that the settings are working to allow us to prevent that collision. We can make some additional adjustments. For example, in the passes section, we can maybe go up to 120 degrees, allowing it to tilt a little bit more. We're going to say OK, again allow it to regenerate. And once it's regenerated, let's go ahead and simulate it again. It's always a good idea as soon as the simulation loads to take a look at the bottom and see where collisions might appear. As soon as it gets to this position, when we had it set between 0 and 90, it would simply pull away because it was going to start colliding. However, now at 120 degrees, it's working its way through that stock. Now, this is a situation where we could very easily come and clean this out first and allow the tool to go through there without contacting the fixture itself. Let's go back into the multi-axis contour, and in the geometry section, notice that we have tool orientation and model. In the tool section, we have our feeds and speeds, and at the bottom we have shaft and holder. Shaft and holder allows us to specify some clearances to avoid collisions with the workpiece. And this is something that we will take a look at, but for right now, we're not going to turn that on because we want to make sure that we understand these settings. There's also a few more down here, such as the maximum fan distance and tool axis sweep. So these values allow us to control some of the max parameters that'll be on a single line of NC code. So what I mean by that is when we're generating the position that the tool is in, the way that it's moving, each time the tool is repositioned, that's going to be another line of code that ends up in your NC file and ultimately controls the tool in the machine. Well, sometimes those can get to be a lot of lines, especially when we're dealing with these multi-axis contours. So sometimes having these maximum sweep angles will allow us to change the amount of lines that end up in the code, which ultimately changes the size of the file. Now, while those aren't going to necessarily affect what we're trying to do here with these collisions, they are helpful to understand to make sure that we can really identify the efficiencies that can be gained with some of these. What I want to do at this point is I want to reset my maximum tilt to 180 degrees. I want to go back to a home view and I want to save this before I make any other changes or adjustments. So once you have it saved, let's go ahead and move on to the next step.